Bernd Schmitt, who has just released his new book, The Changing Face of the Asian Consumer. Mr. Brian, thank you for joining us. And tell us more about this book. How important is it for our readers to pick up this book?
Well, it's critical for managers in the region to understand Asian consumers. And in my book, The Changing Face of the Asian Consumers, I provide a lot of insights and strategies for Asian markets. It's the first book that really summarizes the state of knowledge on Asian consumers. And it provides a lot of useful tools for managing a business in Asia. I also talk about all sorts of industries, anything from beauty to budget travel, to technology businesses, of course. Companies can also get lots of benchmarks based on the case studies and information that I provide in the book.
Now, there's a lot of terminology that's been used called bespoke among women. And now most of the corporates are just wondering, trying to understand, what is that term?
Well, bespoke, I think, is a fancy word for luxury. And I discuss, of course, also luxury, the luxury market in Asia. It's an expanding market because once people have reached the middle class, they're moving further and further up. So they ultimately are becoming aspirational consumers. They aspire to have the best in life, and that means that they want to consume luxury brands and that they want to be part of a bespoke brand community.
Now, how important is this for the West to understand how important the Asian market is? It seems that you love Asia and you wrote this book. What are the 3 key lessons that you have learned from this that you could share to...
Sure. I mean, I've been in Asia for more than 20 years, off and on, in various places from China to Korea to Southeast Asia. I've been lecturing, I've been consulting, and my assessment is that the Asian market is the market of the future, and the Asian consumer is the consumer of the future. You know, right now we may still have the American consumer or the European consumer as a benchmark, as the reference point of, you know, how we do our marketing and how we do how we run our business. I think in the future it will be the Asian consumer. And the proof of that is, of course, the expanding middle class and the growth rates that we've been seeing over the last few years. Right now it's slowing down a little bit, but I think we will always see these sorts of bumps and roadblocks. But I think the overall trajectory for the Asian region is very, very positive. And the consumer businesses in particular will have a very bright future. So as a result, Western companies, as well as any company, really needs to understand Asian consumers.
Now, how important is this Asian Business Summit that's been gathered together here in Singapore with Financial Times and as well as the Asian Consumer Insight? And
right. As you know, I'm directing the Institute on Asian Consumer Insight, and we've teamed up with the Financial Times to run an annual conference, which we call the Asia Business Summit. It's a summit where we bring together leading thinkers and senior management, as well as researchers from across the region, in order to better understand Asian consumers and Asian markets. It's a key conference now for everybody who is interested in Asian markets really to go to.
Now, how can our viewers look out for more information on this conference?
Well, I suggest that you go to asiabusinesssummit.com, which is our website. We have lots of video posted there. You can also see the agenda and the program of the last 2 years when we've been running this summit. I also recommend that people go to the Institute website, which is the Institute on Asian Consumer Insight, ACI.
Now, what's next for you? What will be your next book that you plan to write?
Well, I will be continue to work on Asia and on Asian leadership. I'm very, very much interested now in more the management and leadership angle of Asia, now that I've written about the consumer and market angle in this book, The Changing Face of the Asian Consumer.
Right, and speaking about the changing face of the Asian consumer itself, today Microsoft revealed what is going to come tomorrow. Do you think that is going to be important?
Of course, we always need to think about the future as well, not just about the status quo. And technology will drastically change the future of how we are interacting with others, how we are buying products, also how we will be traveling, how we will be doing our banking services. So technology and understanding what consumers want from technology in the medium and long term, and the long term technology means literally 2, 3 to 5 years, is absolutely critical.
But once again, Mr. Bernd, thank you for joining us here at the Natural Creators Choice. And viewers, please go and get your book from Mr. Bernd. You can get it on Amazon.com or at your nearest bookstore.
Thank you very much for having me. The Changing Face of the Asian Consumer. That's the title of my new book. It was just launched. We will also have it available during the conference outside for sale. And I'm addressing in this book 3 key questions. One question is, how do Asian consumers shop? How do they buy? What makes them tick? What insights do we have about Asian consumers? Second, I talk about what are the right strategies for Asian markets. For example, should you pursue a pan-Asian approach, standardize across markets, or should you localize? And as you know, last year we had a debate on this right here at the Asia Business Summit. There were several supporters of a pan-Asian approach, but there was also many people arguing that no, we need to localize markets. The third question relates to Asian markets and industries. What are the best benchmarks? And what's going on in certain lead markets in terms of, do we only find Asian players or only international players, or do we get a mix between these two kinds of companies? So the book is really about insights and strategies for Asian markets. It is based on hundreds of studies that have been conducted by research agencies, by academics, and by anybody who's interested in Asian markets, strategies, for example. And some of the work is also done by myself, by my team here at ACI, and by some research that I've done by myself. Let me get started with the first topic, which is about Asian insights. Let's light up the bulbs. What do we know about Asian consumers? Well, in the book I discuss lots of things. I talk about, who makes up the middle class? What do we mean by middle class? How is the middle class growing? What do middle class consumers want as their incomes rise? I also talk about the fact that Asian consumers are usually viewed as collectivists, meaning that they have strong bonds to their communities, to their family, unlike many Western consumers. But I'm also discussing that these presumably collectivist consumers are becoming increasingly individualistic, and why this may be the case. But today I'd like to share with you just a more general picture of the psychology of the Asian consumer. How do Asian consumers think? How do they make decisions? What makes them tick? Well, when I read the research reports by research agencies, or when I read some of the academic work, I'm quite frankly confused. Because what I'm reading on the one hand is that Asian consumers are very, very price conscious, very value oriented in terms of getting the right value when they are purchasing something, the right quality at a price. That they are much more price sensitive than many other consumers in the rest of the world. But on the other hand, I see consumers with their shopping bag packed, walking along Orchard Road and other shopping streets here in Asia, and it seems like they shop until they drop. So how does that go together? On the one hand, I'm reading research reports that say Asians are functionalists. They're very utilitarian in their thinking. They want to get the benefits, they want to get the performance characteristics. On the other hand, there is a whole range of research now that says, no, actually, Asians love pleasure. They love experiences. They don't care anymore about the details of these product benefits, these functional product benefits. And I'm reading that Asians are really, really tied to traditions. They're very traditional in nature. They still follow all these traditions that they have from their various cultures. Whether those cultures are Chinese cultures, Indian cultures, or any other Asian culture. But then I'm coming to Asia and I'm walking around again and I'm looking at the landscapes and the cityscapes, and I have the most modern cities in the world. And I'm looking how Asians are dressed, and they're dressing in a very modern, sometimes even fashion-forward, futuristic way. So how do these things go together? Are Asians just schizophrenic? Well, I don't think so. I think what's missing in most of the research is actually a deeper understanding of what might be driving these seemingly incompatible desires. Think for a moment. Think of the world that an Asian consumer is confronted with these days. It is a world where traditions and modernity are juxtaposed. It is a world where you may be born in the countryside and then you end up in a major city with the latest architectural buildings by star architects from around the world. It is a place where you have traditions, but you also have the influx of global brands and other aspects of contemporary culture. It is a place where space and time are in constant flux, where your identity is constantly being redefined and renegotiated. As you're, for example, becoming first-time consumers, and as you're moving up in the middle class, and as you become upper middle class. And this kind of environment is very, very different from the linear, straight, and familiar environment that many Western, and especially American consumers are facing. So I think it's not surprising that Asian consumers show these various tendencies that may seem divergent, pull them in different directions. I believe the best characterization of Asian consumers and of the Asian psychology is that all of these things are happening at the same time. So, for example, Asians, as we heard, want value, but they're also shopping like crazy. They are really value shopaholics. Yes, they care about getting the right price. Yes, they are bargaining. Yes, they want to have, be part of lucky draw and get everything extra when they're purchasing. But at the same time, they also just enjoy shopping. A study in 2005 by A.C. Nielsen said that the keenest recreational shoppers, that's what they call them, the keenest recreational shoppers are based here in Asia. I think Singapore is a very, very good example. In another study, more than 90% of Singaporeans said that they view shopping as a form of entertainment. And I think you all know what I'm talking about. People here live what I have called in my book a mall lifestyle. You go to the mall on the weekend. You spend the whole day there. You eat there. You get your hairdo done, your cosmetics, if you're a woman. You also go to the movies. You have your entertainment things there. So the malls have to become more and more experiential malls because people live there. It's their lifestyle. At the same time, we shouldn't forget that they're also very value conscious. So of course you need the deals in the malls, you need the loyalty programs in the malls, but they're also increasingly shopping online. So maybe in the future, those malls won't be quite as full as they are now, unless of course the mall owners have the right strategies for the future. But there is this tension between value and shopping and trying to get both that characterizes the Asian consumer. They are value shopaholics. And not only that, they are also functionalists, as we heard, and at the same time, they're into pleasure. I call them functional hedonists. Asians are functional because they want to get something for their money. There's again the price orientation. But more than that, there is a very, very proud orientation and culture throughout Asia that has been here for decades and decades. It is what I call an engineering mindset. Many Asian societies have excellent engineers. This is the region in the world where young children have the highest math scores. Quite different from the United States. This is a part of the world where people really believe in functionality, in utility, and that things need to work. They are certainly oriented towards that. But I think as their incomes rise, they also want to have some fun. They also want to get some pleasure. They want to get some experiences. So at the same time, they're also into hedonism more and more. Especially with the new generation, we are seeing this. There's a generational difference within consumers. So we need to take into account that Asians are not just functionally oriented, but are also seeking pleasure. Functional hedonists. And finally, Asians are also what I call traditional futurists. I I already mentioned some of these traditions and rituals. They come, of course, from various religious or philosophical backgrounds, from Buddhism, from Hinduism, Taoism, and so on. And we have done a seminar at ACI on the various religious and philosophical influences on consumer behavior. We have also done a seminar on the auspicious beliefs that are coming out of this. Perhaps even the irrational beliefs when it comes to that certain foods are doing certain things to your body and to your mind. Or that you need to apply certain oils because that is good as part of a massage, but it's also more broadly good for your sense of well-being. There are lots of these sorts of beliefs in Asia, in all different Asian cultures. And that's why we often say Asians are very, very traditional. They're still adhering to those traditions, to these rituals, to these norms that are coming from these religious and philosophical systems. But what we are also saying is the modern cityscapes that I mentioned earlier, and what we are also witnessing is that very, very few Asians nowadays are still dressed, for example, in traditional ways. I don't think anybody here is sitting in a traditional dress or suit. The last time I saw somebody in a sarong was on Singapore Airlines. That's marketing. I can't even remember when I saw last time a Japanese woman in a kimono or a Chinese woman in a Chinese traditional dress. In India, sure, you still see women in saris, but less and less and less so, and especially the young women don't wear those traditional dresses anymore. So Asians, in many, many ways, also look towards the future. They want to be modern, contemporary, even futuristic. So imagine we are dealing with that sort of consumer. What are you going to do with this insight that Asians are, at the same time, value shopaholics, functional hedonists, and traditional futurists? Well, I think one key lesson is that the traditional way of segmenting markets doesn't work. The way we do it in Western markets is we look at each one of those as separate segments, as value consumers versus those crazy experiential consumers that I just want to splash. We are looking at people that are into functionality, and we have models in marketing, conjoint analysis, various decision support systems that we have, multi-attribute models that focus on functionality. So we look at one consumer segment as the functionalists. But we are also looking at another consumer segment as hedonists. The same for traditional and futurism. It doesn't work that way. I think the biggest insight is that you need to do everything at the same time. And as a result, you need certain products, you need certain campaigns. And I'm discussing this further in my book. What you need is basically what I call postmodern brands. Because postmodern brands have exactly that sort of integration of seemingly incompatible elements. So Louis Vuitton, very traditional brand, but doing very modern, very cutting-edge designs with designers like Murakami, and the Murakami bag, as you all know, has become a big, big, big seller here in Asia. I'd like to move on from insights to the idea of strategies, Asian strategies. Well, in the book I discuss various strategy issues. How to enter Asian markets, for example. Also the strategy issue of standardization versus localization. Today I'd like to talk about another issue which relates to brands. And remember last year when I was talking about brands, I said Asians are really, really crazy about brands. Do you remember that? So it's brands everywhere. Brands, I want the brand, I want the right brand, brands. Asians have caught a disease, branditis. And up to this point, there's no cure for it. Not even a recession. There's no vaccine for it either. And it's spreading from one country to the next. It started out in Japan, then it moved on to Korea. Nowadays it's all over Asia. It's in Hong Kong, it's in Singapore, it's in Taiwan. It's in all over Southeast Asia and the emerging markets. Asians are obsessed with brands. Now, why is that? Well, some of it has to do with the fact that Asians are value conscious and they want quality. And when you have a brand, you get a certain quality and you get it consistently. But I think that's only part of the picture. Ultimately, what branding in Asia is all about is status and prestige. Here at ACI, we just launched a major survey called the Asia Wave Study, which surveyed thousands of consumers in 10 Asian markets. Over the last 3-4 weeks, I've looked at these data. I reanalyzed them with a statistician back at Columbia Business School, where I'm based. And the major finding in the data set is that everybody in Asia, no country differences, no differences between countryside and city. Everyone is obsessed with brands, and it is all about status and prestige. So you're starting out and becoming a member of the middle class. Once you buy a brand, you're knowledgeable as a consumer. You can claim the status of knowing that you know about how consumer behavior works and how markets work. You're moving on in the middle class, so you become part of the core middle class. Now you want brands for the similar reasons. It's again about status and prestige. Now you want to show that you have acquired new knowledge and also more income to afford those brands. You're moving further up. You are now at the upper middle class. So now you want to compare yourself with others who have the same brands. You want to become part of a brand community. So it's always about brands, 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 and it is always about status and prestige. But the question is, of course, what kind of brands do Asians like? And they are also in our data set that we've just analyzed, as well as in numerous other findings that we have about Asian markets. There is a very, very simple conclusion. Asians care about foreign brands. It's all about foreign brands. And in particular, Western brands, global brands. Why is that? It has to do with the status that you are trying to show off. It has also to do with the fact that Western brands have acquired a certain stature within the world economy, and they have a certain consistency. And they are the original. They are not the sort of knockoffs that we still have in many, many Asian markets. But there's a caveat here. It's no longer just the Western brands. It's no longer just the foreign brands from Western countries. Nowadays, it is entirely possible that a consumer from Thailand or Vietnam admires a Japanese product and a Korean product and maybe a Taiwanese product as much as they would a Western product. They're as excited by a, for example, Japanese air conditioner, a Korean smartphone, and a Taiwanese computer as they are by similar products coming from the West. Why is that? It is because those kinds of brands, Panasonic or Samsung or Acer, have in fact built themselves into global brands. So we are back to square one. It's all about foreign brands, it's all about global brands, and unless you are building a powerful global brand in this region, your brands will not be successful. That is the major research finding that we are seeing in lots and lots of different studies that have been done on Asian consumers. Just one very, very quick word about what kind of image do Asian consumers like. Well, we heard earlier, it is functionality, and at the same time, it is also some element of hedonism and pleasure. It is certain traditional elements, but it is also, of course, certain futuristic elements. And of course, the brand always needs to be very value conscious in terms of what the consumer considers to be a core value for them. Now let me move on to the last topic. We talked about insights, we talked about strategies, and in the book I also feature various Asian markets that can serve as benchmarks. And those Asian markets range from beauty to budget airlines to internet companies. Today I'd like to talk about the technology business very briefly. Take what we've just learned about consumers in terms of insights, the different types of characteristics that they have, and also in terms of the strategy, the brand strategy, for example, that we need for Asian markets. And how can we apply this to the technology business? I think it is absolutely clear by now that the technology business for consumer electronics and for consumer technology products is no longer just about technology. It is heavily, heavily about brands. And that is because Asian consumers are looking for major brands. And it is no longer just about the technicalities in the brands. Asians are not just techno nerds anymore. No, they also want to have some hedonism, some pleasure. So one of the companies I feature in the book is Samsung. I've written a case on them as well. I've done some work with them in the past. And I think they best illustrate what I'm talking about. In comparison, for example, to the situation that BlackBerry was recently facing, in terms of neglecting its brand and just focusing on functionality. In contrast to BlackBerry, Samsung has done a fabulous job in focusing on design, in focusing on creativity, and in focusing on lifestyle. That has been their focus for the last 5 to 10 years. More than 10 years ago, they were known as a relatively cheap, okay quality supplier, and of course also marketer of consumer electronic products. This has all changed. Nowadays Samsung is a cutting-edge lifestyle product. And it is thus very, very appropriate for the kind of functional hedonist orientation, as well as traditional futurist orientation, as well as value shopaholic orientation that we've discussed about Asian consumers. Alibaba, a B2B e-commerce company originally, is another interesting case to watch, because increasingly the Alibaba business will be dependent on consumers. Increasingly, it will be about the understanding of consumers. And if it is true that Alibaba may become the most valuable company in the world, as some people believe once they do an IPO, I think we also need to understand the e-commerce business more and more from a consumer perspective. So to summarize, we need insights about Asian consumers, detailed insight, sometimes complex insights about Asian consumers. We can't do the simple, straight, direct segmentations that we do in other markets. We need to decide on the right kind of strategies. For example, for brands, what do consumers value in brands? And out of this, we need to develop the right products and services for Asian markets. So in sum, what we really need is to understand the changing face of the Asian consumer in order to have insights and strategies for Asian markets. Thank you very much.